Mirabito.
I'm being told to speak for less than 2 minutes. First of all, how many of you had dessert? How many of you had dessert? Why don't we let them have dessert? Can we let them have dessert?
It's in another room. It's in another room.
All right.
2 minutes.
Look, I had some remarks prepared. I'm going to dispense with thanking everybody, but I do want us tonight, as we go to sleep, to say a special prayer of remembrance for Sam Huff. Okay? Some of us were at Sam's viewing and funeral today, and we say thank you to him, not just for what he did for the party, but what he did for the people in this community, and all of the different places that he involved himself, without regard to whether people were Democrats, Republicans, or Independents. He lived his beliefs on a daily basis, and it's a lesson for us to learn. There's been a lot of joking and talking tonight, and you can't come to a Democratic committee dinner without razzing the Republicans, right? But I want to tell you something. It's okay for 2 hours at a dinner, but it's not the way we do our business. Eugene DePasquale didn't tell you that he and I are on a bill to close part of the Delaware loophole, that I took a lot of grief from some of the Democrats because it didn't do everything that we wanted it to do. There's different technicalities about closing the Delaware loophole, but let me make it simple for you. The window is open and all of the tax dollars are going out. And a Republican came along who said, I got a plan to close the window halfway. Are you on board with me? And Eugene DePasquale had the integrity to stand up and say, yes, I am. And I followed him, as did others. And I took a lot of heat from some Democrats for doing that. But our job is about solving problems for people. If we forget that, it doesn't matter what party we're in. It doesn't matter what political affiliation we are. Because all we are another set of political hacks doing what the most cynical among us have told us politicians do. I, for one, at the age of 56 this summer with a little 2.5-year-old running around, cannot see the sense in doing that. And that's why I'm excited by the candidacy of Luana Cleveland and Phil Scolo and Kristen, because they are cut from the same mold. We need to sit up and recognize that. And we need to make sure that when we conduct ourselves, we do it in a way that comes out of integrity and honesty. Because otherwise we are no different. We are no different from the people who we claim we have a right to unseat. I didn't plan to say that, but I said it because, I was tempted to come here tonight dressed as a black sheep. But I was afraid that might scare off the state senator. I say that because that is what we are about. Kristen didn't tell you that when she went to the state representative, unfortunately, his law firm represented the defendant who she needed to sue to stop the pesticides from being sprayed on her fields, on her farm, on her land. How can we be about advocating for citizens when we are so tied up in situations like that? So I say to you, thanks to all of you, Jesse, you and all the others, Sam Huff, all of you have been an inspiration for us. And there's no doubt that all of you in the room, the Democratic base, came out to help me get elected. And then there are people here tonight like my Chief of Staff, Tanya Anderson, and Christy and Stacy, and Shirley, the treasurer. Some of them may not even be Democrats. But let me tell you something. They work tirelessly for the people of Pennsylvania. And that's why people respect them. And that's how we win, and that's how we move ahead. You know, Eugene wasn't joking when he said that in the Democratic caucus in Harrisburg, this district has a 38% performance. The 83rd district has a 38% Democratic performance. It's the lowest in the state. That means that in a vanilla-flavored election, a Democrat will get 38% of the vote. Well, we have to be about doing something different. We have to be about reaching out to Democrats, Republicans, independents, people of different socioeconomic levels, business people, labor union members, workers who are not in unions, because after all, we know that only 11% of the private sector workforce is unionized. 11%. Because the debate has gone so far in this country that workers aren't even allowed to talk about the benefits of unionization. That's really what's happened. We need to reach out to people of all races, people of all genders, people of all different opinions on the issue of pro-life and pro-choice. And we make a mistake when we define the issue in the language that those who wish to make certain changes use. You know, I have to tell you something. As a result of the budget cuts that went into effect, Williamsport Hospital is going to receive, if the Department of Public Welfare goes through, less money for the births of unborn children. Let me tell you a little story about what happened. In June 2011, the governor proposed legislation that would allow the Department of Public Welfare to make sweeping changes to get out fraud, waste, and corruption. Jack Wagner, who we have great respect for, found $300 million of waste in the DPW budget. A Democrat. They came to us and they said, we want the authority to go past regulations without regard to the IRRC and the general legislature we want to get the fraud, waste, and abuse. I voted for that bill. Many Democrats voted against it. I voted for it because I take you on your face. If you tell me that you are going to get fraud, waste, and abuse out, I take you on your word that's what you're going to do. The hospital just wrote to me in March. The Department of Public Welfare has announced, even though 50% of all the births in Pennsylvania are on medical assistance, 50% of all the births in Pennsylvania are on medical assistance, DPW is cutting how much they're going to give the hospitals for the birth of a normal newborn. Now, to me, that is not fraud, waste, and abuse. And to me, by the way, I think we have a real policy issue to understand. Why are 50% of the births in Pennsylvania on medical assistance? What are we doing or not doing as a society that is where we're at in the year 2012? As a result, in Williamsport, Susquehanna Health, last year in 2011, there were about 340 births that were in that category, and it'll cost the hospital about $340,000. Why do I tell you that story? I tell you that story because we have to be about educating the public about the consequences of the decisions that are being made in the line of rhetoric. The rhetoric being, let's get fraud, waste, and abuse out of the DPW, and the reality that decisions that are made where legislators are not held accountable end up hurting the public. And that's what I say about the issue of whether some of us feel more or less strongly on the issue of when life begins. Do not let us get divided. And yet at the same time that we fight with each other over whether we call ourselves pro-life or pro-choice, budgets are passed that cut payment for children and for births. We cannot go down this road. We have a responsibility, I believe, to make sure that we do something different. And I believe we have the capacity to do that. You know, the seats that have been discussed tonight, the 84th seat, the 83rd seat. We can win these seats. We can win them not because we're entitled to win them because of some party label. Not because we're entitled to win them because we are a black sheep or a white sheep. Not because we're part of an inner circle of power in a community that sometimes ends up being very destructive even to its own. But I believe we can win because I think voters are smarter than party labels. I think that voters are more complicated than party labels. I think that voters care more about protecting their families and their communities than protecting party labels. I think that voters care more about protecting the American dream. You know, I and others, Patrick Murphy's brother and others have talked about them, Eugene DePasquale, all of us. We would not be here were it not for the American dream. We would not be here were it not for an opportunity for free public education at a decent school and an opportunity to go to college. That is just a fact. So, many Republicans, some of whom who couldn't be here tonight, made phone calls on my behalf, asking friends and neighbors to vote for Mirabito because they understood the message of fighting for our communities and fighting for rural communities. That story I told you about the newborns, that's going to hurt rural communities more than the rest of the state. Susquehanna Health, not only being the largest employer in our county with 3,000 people, but also being a place that's close by to have children, it's going to hurt rural communities. So I want you to recognize and try to leave here tonight looking at the world through a different paradigm, looking at the world with a different set of eyes. You know, I was proud that this year I was appointed to the Center for Rural Pennsylvania. And ironically, Senator Yaw is the chairman and Garth Everett is also on it. So we got all three of us from Lycoming County. And that can be a strength for us. But I want you to understand something. What you heard tonight from people speaking are people who are trying to fight for their communities. You know, the budget that was passed made significant cuts in state funding for rural schools. I'll give you an example. I told Joe Sestak is gone, I think, right? He's from Delaware County. The cut for a typical school, Radnor Township, is $1,300 approximately from a classroom in Radnor Township. You know how much the cut was for Williamsport for a classroom? $18,000. $18,000. So it was a budget that was not only balanced on the backs of working families, seniors, but also those who live in the rural part of the state. And the saddest part of the story is that the median incomes in Delaware County are oftentimes twice what they are in our community, where we have, in the city of Williamsport, a median income of $27,000. Half of the families trying to survive on under $27,000. We have work to do. We have a responsibility to get it done. One other example before I finish. The budget this year proposes a 20% reduction in funds for human services as they're placed into block grants. Block grants that were designed to try to give the counties more flexibility. From a policy perspective, the governor was trying to do something to give them more flexibility. The problem is that the 20% cut, combined with the fact that many of the remaining funds are federal funds and cannot be used at the discretion of the county, puts our human service providers in a terrible position. And I'm not talking about people who traditionally some of us like to think are on the dole. I'm talking about people with intellectual disabilities. That is the term that many of you may or may not recognize for people who are living with mental retardation. Those are the folks who are being cut. Those are the families who are being hurt by the budget. So I suggest to you tonight that if we believe we can provide leadership which our community and our state desperately needs. We have to put aside partisan, sectarian, narrow views about how we make conversation with the rest of the people in our community. We have a responsibility to find ways to reach out to all voters, regardless of political persuasion, because we need to start where they're at. And we need to take them some distance to explain why it's important to fund education, why it's important to fund human services, why it's important to allow people the opportunity to have a labor union, and why it's important not to take simplistic approaches to say that all of the problems with our budget are the result of teachers or this group or that group. We need to be able to provide leadership and to listen to them honestly, and actually not just pretend that we're listening. It's not easy to do. How many of us in our own personal relationships find out that sometimes we don't listen? All of us, myself included. And I'd be remiss tonight if I didn't thank my wife who left for going out in the rain to get the yard signs and calling me when I was at the Veterans to say that I'm going to get them. So I thank her for that. We can win these elections. And we can win them because we're doing the right thing. That's why a guy like Eugene T. Pasquale, you know, when I need some guidance in Harrisburg, I know with Eugene I'm going to get the straight scoop. From what I've learned from talking to Phil, and even in the short time that I've known Kristen, I believe I'm going to get the straight scoop. None of us has all the answers. But when we have the capacity to try to lead honestly and with some conviction, I believe we can be very successful. So join us, let's move on, let's do it, okay? Thank you.
There's only